She stood in the middle of the ballroom, mocked in front of 40 guests, forced into a dance she never agreed to. The fiancé laughed, waving cash in the air like a prize. But the moment the music started, everything changed. And when the front door opened, no one in that room was ready for what happened next. Before we continue, if stories about pride, karma, and quiet strength speak to you, make sure you hit subscribe and turn on notifications. This story has a twist you will not see coming, and trust me, you don't want to miss a single second of it. Now, let's begin. In a quiet corner of a city known for its wealth and its secrets, there stood a mansion that belonged to a man named Damon Wolfe. He was one of those names people whispered about in business meetings and charity galas, a man who had built an empire from nothing and now lived behind gates that most people would never get close to. But this story isn't really about him. Not at first. It's about a woman named Elena Marsh, who worked quietly inside those gates, cleaning floors that cost more than her yearly salary and dusting shelves lined with things she could never afford. Elena had been working in that house for almost 2 years. She was in her late 20s, soft-spoken, and always the first to arrive and the last to leave. She never complained. She never gossiped. She simply did her job, and she did it well. The other staff respected her, though none of them knew much about her past. She kept to herself, answered questions with short, polite replies, and disappeared into her small room above the garage every evening like a woman carrying something she didn't want anyone to see. What none of them knew was that Elena hadn't always mopped floors for a living. Years ago, in a different life, she had trained for hours every single day in a small studio with mirrors on every wall, chasing a dream that had once felt so close she could almost touch it. But dreams don't always survive the weight of real life, and somewhere along the way, Elena had folded that dream into a box and pushed it to the back of her heart, telling herself it didn't matter anymore. Damon was rarely home. His work took him across continents, from boardrooms in New York to factories in Singapore, and the house often felt more like a museum than a home. In his absence, the house was run by his fiancée, a woman named Vivienne Cross. Vivienne was beautiful in the way magazine covers are beautiful, polished, sharp, and always aware of who was watching her. She had grown up with money, married into more of it through her first engagement, and now stood one wedding away from securing a fortune that would set her for life. Vivienne didn't see the staff as people. To her, they were simply part of the furniture, useful but forgettable. She had a particular way of speaking to them, sweet in front of guests, cold and dismissive the moment the door closed. And for reasons that even the other staff couldn't explain, she had taken a special dislike to Elena. Maybe it was the quiet confidence Elena carried, even while scrubbing floors. Maybe it was the way she never flinched under Vivienne's sharp comments, never gave her the satisfaction of a reaction. Whatever the reason, Vivienne seemed to enjoy testing her, pushing her, watching to see when she would finally break. It started small. Vivienne would leave messes on purpose just to watch Elena clean them without a single word. She would call her by the wrong name in front of guests, then laugh and say she simply didn't remember it. She would criticize her work even when it was perfect, just to remind her who held the power in that house. Elena endured it all with the same calm expression, the same steady hands, the same silence that somehow made Vivienne even more determined to shake her. One evening, Vivienne decided to host a party. Not just any party, but a grand celebration meant to show off her engagement to Damon before their wedding, which was only weeks away. She invited business partners, socialites, and a handful of influencers who documented everything for their followers. The house was transformed for the night, filled with candlelight, soft music, and the kind of laughter that only comes from people who have never had to worry about money. Elena, along with the rest of the staff, worked quietly in the background, carrying trays, refilling glasses, making sure everything ran smoothly. She stayed near the edges of the room, hoping to remain invisible, which was exactly how she preferred it. But Vivienne had other plans. Halfway through the evening, after a few too many glasses of champagne, Vivienne's eyes landed on Elena across the room. A slow, mischievous smile spread across her face, the kind of smile that never meant anything good. She clinked her glass loudly, drawing the attention of her guests, and called out for everyone to gather in the center of the ballroom. "I have an idea," she announced, her voice dripping with amusement. "Let's make tonight a little more interesting." The guests murmured with curious excitement, phones already rising into the air, ready to capture whatever was about to happen. Vivienne reached into her small clutch bag and pulled out a thick stack of cash, fanning it out dramatically for everyone to see. $7,000, she said, holding it up like a trophy, for anyone brave enough to dance for us right now. Her eyes moved slowly, deliberately, until they landed on Alina, who was standing near the wall with a tray still in her hands. What do you say? Think you can earn this? The room fell into an uncomfortable hush. A few guests laughed nervously, unsure if this was a joke. Others exchanged uneasy glances, sensing exactly what was happening, but no one said a word. No one ever did in rooms like this. Power has a way of silencing people, even when they know something is wrong. Alina felt every eye in the room turn toward her. Her hands tightened slightly around the tray she was holding. She understood exactly what Vivienne was doing. This wasn't an invitation. It was a trap designed to embarrass her, to remind her in front of everyone exactly where she stood. I don't think that's necessary, Alina said quietly, her voice steady despite the heat rising in her chest. Vivienne tilted her head, feigning innocence. Oh, come on. It's just a bit of fun, unless of course you're too embarrassed. She turned to her guests with a small laugh. I mean, look at her. When was the last time someone like her danced for anything other than a paycheck? A ripple of laughter moved through parts of the crowd. The kind of laughter that comes not from genuine amusement, but from the discomfort of not knowing what else to do. Someone in the back lifted their phone higher, clearly ready to record. Alina set the tray down slowly on a nearby table. Something inside her shifted in that moment, something that had been buried for years beginning to stir awake. She thought about walking away. She thought about staying silent and letting the humiliation pass like it always had before. But something about the smugness in Vivienne's eyes, the casual cruelty of turning her dignity into a spectacle, lit a small fire she hadn't felt in a very long time. Fine, Alina said, lifting her chin. I'll dance. Vivienne blinked, clearly not expecting her to agree so easily. She recovered quickly, though, gesturing toward the small open space in the center of the ballroom with an exaggerated flourish. Wonderful. Someone start the music. The room shifted, guests forming a loose circle, phones raised, whispers spreading like static in the air. Alina walked slowly to the center of the floor, her uniform simple and unadorned, nothing like the elegant gowns surrounding her in shades of burgundy, gold, and soft blush. She looked for a moment completely out of place. Small, exposed. The music began, a slow, classical piece someone had selected as a joke, expecting her to stumble through a few awkward steps before giving up in embarrassment. But as the first notes filled the room, something in Alina's posture changed. Her shoulders lifted. Her chin rose. Her breathing steadied in a way that looked almost practiced. And then she moved. It wasn't hesitant. It wasn't clumsy. Her arms extended with a grace that seemed to belong to another world entirely, her feet finding the rhythm of the music as if she had been born inside it. She spun, controlled and fluid, every motion deliberate, every extension precise. The laughter in the room died almost instantly, replaced by a stunned, disbelieving silence. Vivienne's smile faltered. Her arms, still crossed in smug satisfaction, slowly dropped to her sides. This wasn't what she had planned. This wasn't supposed to happen. Alina danced like someone who had trained for years, someone who had once dreamed of stages far grander than a ballroom floor. Every turn, every extension of her arms, every subtle shift of her body told a story that no one in that room had known existed. The guests who had raised their phones to mock her now stood frozen, capturing something entirely different, something that left them speechless. The music swelled, and so did the emotion in the room. Alina's eyes glistened, not from sadness, but from something deeper, a release of years spent hiding a part of herself she had convinced herself no longer mattered. In that moment, she wasn't a maid being humiliated for entertainment. She was simply herself, fully and completely, for the first time in a very long while. And it was at that exact moment, as the final notes of the music began to fade and Alina slowed into her final pose, that the large front doors of the mansion swung open. Damon Wolfe stepped inside, his coat still on, his phone halfway lowered from a call he had been finishing. He had returned early from his trip, hoping to surprise Vivienne before the party ended. Instead, he found himself standing frozen in the doorway, staring at a scene he could never have imagined. The entire room was silent, all eyes shifting between Alina, still catching her breath in the center of the floor, and Damon, standing motionless near the entrance. For a few seconds, no one moved. No one spoke. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Damon's eyes moved slowly around the room, taking in the phones still raised, the stunned expressions, and finally Vivienne, who stood pale and unmoving near the edge of the crowd. He didn't need anyone to explain what had happened. The tension in the room told him everything. He walked forward, his footsteps the only sound echoing across the marble floor, until he stood only a few feet from Alina. His expression wasn't angry, not yet. It was something closer to disbelief, layered with a recognition that seemed to catch him completely off guard. "Alina," he said quietly, almost as if testing the name on his tongue. Alina looked up, startled by the familiarity in his voice. And in that instant, something passed between them, a flicker of memory neither of them had expected to surface in a room full of strangers. Years earlier, before wealth and empires and mansions with marble floors, Damon had spent a summer volunteering at a small community arts program, long before his name meant anything to anyone. It was there he had met a determined young dancer who spent every spare hour practicing in a cramped studio, dreaming of something bigger than the small town she came from. He remembered her passion, her discipline, the way she moved like she had something to prove to the entire world. He had lost touch with her over the years, his life pulling him in directions that left little room for looking back. He never imagined he would find her again like this, dressed in a uniform, standing in his own home, forced into a performance meant to belittle her. "I didn't know it was you," he said softly, the weight of realization settling into his voice. Alina offered a small, tired smile. "It's been a long time." Damon turned slowly, his gaze sweeping across the silent crowd before finally settling on Vivienne. His expression hardened, the warmth that had briefly softened his face replaced by something colder, more controlled. "What exactly happened here?" he asked, his voice calm but carrying an edge that made the room shrink around him. Vivienne opened her mouth, searching for an explanation that might soften what everyone had just witnessed. "It was just a bit of fun, Damon. A little game, that's all." "A game," he repeated, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You offered money to humiliate someone in my own home in front of my guests, and you're calling it a game." The guests around them shifted uncomfortably, suddenly very interested in the floor beneath their feet. Vivienne's confidence, usually so effortless, began to crack under the weight of everyone's attention. "She works for us," Vivienne said, her voice rising slightly, defensive now. "It was harmless. She agreed to it herself." "She agreed," Damon said slowly, "because you cornered her in front of 40 people and left her no room to refuse without being mocked further. That's not a choice, Vivienne. That's cruelty dressed up as entertainment." The room remained silent, no one daring to interrupt as the truth settled heavily over the space. Damon turned back toward Alina, his voice softening once again. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "You didn't deserve any of this." Alina shook her head gently. "You don't have to apologize for someone else's choices." "No," Damon said, "but I do have to answer for what happens in my own home." He turned back to Vivienne, and this time there was no warmth left in his expression at all. "I think it's best if you leave tonight, Vivienne, and I think we both know this isn't just about tonight." A collective gasp moved through the crowd, phones lowering slightly as the true weight of what was unfolding became clear. Vivienne's face flushed with humiliation and anger, but she said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. The engagement that had once promised her security and status dissolved in that single moment, in front of the very people she had hoped to impress. She turned sharply and walked out, her heels echoing across the marble floor, the sound growing fainter until the heavy front doors closed behind her one final time. The room slowly began to breathe again, quiet conversations rising in place of the earlier silence. But the true story of that night wasn't about Vivienne's downfall. It was about the quiet strength Alina had carried the entire time, the years of dignity she had held on to even when no one else seemed to notice. In the weeks that followed, Damon made sure the world knew Alina's talent wasn't something to be laughed at. He arranged for her to return to formal training, connecting her with instructors who could help her reclaim the dream she had folded away so many years ago. He never treated it as charity, only as an opportunity long overdue. Alina still visited the house sometimes, though not as staff anymore. The other employees, who had once known so little about her, now understood exactly who she was, a woman who had endured quiet cruelty with grace in every sense of the word, and who had never once let it define her. As for Vivienne, her story spread quickly through the same social circles she had once tried so hard to impress. The video guests had taken that night, meant to capture her cruel little joke, instead became evidence of her own downfall, shared and reshared until the truth was impossible to hide from. This story is a reminder that respect costs nothing, yet its absence can cost everything. You never truly know the strength, the talent, or the story carried by the person standing quietly in the background. Kindness should never depend on someone's job title or their bank account. If this story moved you, take a moment to like this video, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe for more stories like this one. And remember, the way you treat people who can do nothing for you says everything about who you really are.